the way we language our world creates data points, and these data points are really powerful to convey a diversity of expression. Time and place, the sort of gravitas of emotion, urgency, all of these nuances of communication. So it is very powerful. And it's a myth that you might have heard the statistics, 35% of communication is verbal and 65% is non-verbal. That is a myth, because if that were true, it would mean that someone from another culture, speaking another language could say something and you would be able to understand what they were saying because you'd have, a good proportion of their message. So that is a myth, but it is important that you can articulate with confidence, authority, particularly in the workplace.
Hey everybody, it's so good to see you all. I want to thank you all for joining in on tonight's webinar. It seems like you guys are up and early for some of you, and so we appreciate that, and joining after work hours. Insane. My name is Ella Nguyen, and I will be your moderator for tonight's talk with Kerryn. Now, just before we go ahead and start, there's a few housekeeping rules I want to mention. So we do encourage everyone to please turn your webcams on so we can connect, because it's been a crazy year, so some faces would be really nice. So also feel free to pop your LinkedIn details in the chat box so we can add each other after, during, however you want to connect afterwards. That'd be great. Also, any questions at any time throughout the session, feel free to pop chat, or if you want to comment on anything really, feel free to kind of mention it in the chat, or if we have some time, go off mute and have a chat about that too. That'd be cool. Also, we are recording this, so it may be shared on social media, and we will be sharing this afterwards so you can rewatch it with your mates. But yeah, before we start, I guess I want to do a really quick intro to PDF, Professional Development Forum, for those who are new to us today. So PDF was established to help young professionals to reach their full potential in the modern Australian workplace. Now, we do believe that everyone, not just few, should have access to the knowledge, the mindset, and the networks to develop themselves. We also believe that by becoming the best versions of ourselves, we lead a happier, more fulfilling life and inspire those around us to do the same as well. And we do this by running events like this to aim to inform, connect, and inspire, and by sharing what we learned with our community. So welcome. And tonight we are really lucky to have Kerryn Gamble as our guest speaker. Now, Kerryn Gamble is an expert in confidence, and she's a former Vice President of Professional Speakers Australia, and also author of Unstoppable, really great book, right? Everyone should grab a copy. I'll give you some links to it afterwards. She specialises in transforming ambitious professionals into compelling communicators. Working with execs, managers, business owners, Kerryn elevates verbal and non-verbal communication skills to build the necessary foundations for personal growth and leadership development. Now, without further ado, I will now hand it over to Kerryn. Hey, Kerryn.
Thank you, Ella, for that wonderful introduction. I feel I'm very special now. There has been a theme in my life of helping ambitious professionals noticed for all the right reasons, not for the wrong reasons. And part of that stems from my own personal journey growing up. And I grew up with a highly intelligent sibling, and be carted off to visits with educational psychologists and other professionals. And he was the sort of kid that at a very young age taught himself how to read by watching Play School and Sesame Street. And so when my mother thought maybe it's time to introduce some books, he just already started reading. So he's very, very bright chap. And what I learned early on growing up is I felt like I never measured up to my brother. He was brilliant and he's very articulate. So I felt like I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder and flew under the radar very much because he was very much golden boy in the limelight. So that became a bit of a pattern in my life until a few eventful moments, which I won't go into the gory details of, but suffice to say, I came to the conclusion that that was not helping me and it was not serving me. And so I have been on a very long and lengthy journey to turn that around and putting myself in all kinds of scenarios, rather uncomfortable scenarios at times, to turn that around. What I do now is I build capability and build leadership programs for organisations so they can create a capability uplift in-house. And tonight, what I'm going to be sharing with you is a handful of techniques that I have used and shared with people, and they have gained a great deal from these. And I'm going to keep it really practical and things that you can implement straight away. Now, before we get going, I know you've been invited to turn your cameras on, which is wonderful. It's great to see your faces on the screen. This is all about communicating with confidence and authority, and I thought you might be up for a little bit of a challenge and a bit of playtime, if you like. And so I'm going to demonstrate first, but afterwards, in a moment, I will then ask you to turn your cameras and put your sound on to participate in this activity. Very short. And this is called laughing yoga. Now, I don't know if any of you have done this before. It was only fairly recently that I discovered laughing yoga. And it's bizarre. And because one of the keys to building confidence is the ability to not get hung on judgment or what other people think. So we're going to do it in 3 stages. And so the first thing is to make a single sound like this. Ha! That's it. So if everyone would now turn the cameras off, please, and turn your sound on. And on the count of 3, we're going to do ha. So 1, 2, 3. Ha!
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 I think we can do that better. Okay, on 3. Okay, on 3. We got that. 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Ha.
Ha!
Ha!
All right, next we're going to do 3 in a row. So it's going to be ha, ha, ha. All right, on 3. 1, 2, 3. Ha!
Ha!
The final challenge, are you ready? We're taking this to the next level now. Do the first 10 letters of the alphabet. I think that's A to J. I probably need to double count that. So you're going to laugh the alphabet. So that's going to be something like A, B, C, 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 D. All right. Yeah, it's a bit of a stretch, but I trust in you and I trust you can do it. All right. So on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3.
A, C, D, E, F, G, H, I.
Am I the only one, or is everyone just turned off their mics? Anyway, well done, guys. For those who brought some game to that, I have total respect for you. All right, so now we'll flip it. Your microphones off and your cameras back on. That would be wonderful. And for the people who joined us during that activity, they may think they're in the wrong room, but this is communicating with confidence and authority. And yeah, we had a little bit of fun there. So well done to you all for those who participated. So communication is a really big topic, and it's often divided into 2 parts, into verbal and into non-verbal. And tonight's focus is on verbal, and I'm going to qualify that one more step, and that is spoken word rather than the written word, because written communication is also verbal. So we're going to focus on the verbal tonight. Now, it's been said that how we language our world is how we experience the world. And look, I don't know if that's true exactly. What I will say is that the way we language our world creates data points, and these data points are really powerful to convey a diversity of expression, time and place, the sort of gravitas of emotion, urgency, all of these nuances of communication. So it is very powerful. And it's a myth that you might have heard the statistics, 35% of communication is verbal and 65% is non-verbal. That is a myth, because if that were true, it would mean that someone from another culture, speaking another language could say something and you would be able to understand what they were saying, because you'd have, a good proportion of their message. So that is a myth, but it is important that you can articulate with confidence, authority, particularly in the workplace. Okay, so some of you may have been in this situation before where you are the subject matter expert and yet you feel like you've been over talked or interrupted by someone that's not necessarily a subject matter expert, yet they have the confidence to talk over you. And we can see why this happens. It's called the Dunning-Kruger Effect. And you can see on the left-hand side that there's a whole lot of confidence, but yet the wisdom or the actual knowledge is quite low. But the more you learn, there's a point where you learn, you realise that there's a whole lot more that you don't know. And so sometimes people who are highly confident will often speak over people who actually know a whole lot more than them. And we call that the Dunning-Kruger effect. And what we see is that in business, this is very much the case. It's not necessarily the most, the businesses with the best product who are most successful. It's the businesses who market the best, the most successful. Apple is a great example of this. They were not the first to market with the, well, back then it was called the iPod. It was, I believe it was the Samsung, Panasonic, it was another company. They were the first to market with the actual handheld device, and they marketed with X gig of data and all the technical specifications. But what they didn't realize that people are not interested in gig. They want to know, what does that mean for them? And so Apple came up with their equivalent product and they market it as iPod, 1,000 songs in your pocket. So it's about how you present yourself, how you articulate your message. That is very important in the workplace. And what I mean by that is, okay, you can see these three figures here on the screen. We've got passive, we don't want that, we don't want aggressive. It's somewhere in the middle. And when you're passive in a situation, what you're really doing is disrespecting yourself. When you're aggressive, you're disrespecting someone else. So we're really after assertiveness. That's the key. And the definition of that is that someone who's self-assured and confident without aggression. And so that's what we're aiming for here. And it's about going from doubting yourself to asserting yourself, of course, without aggression. It's about letting go of the need for external approval and replacing that with internal permission. Fundamentally, it's about meaning what you say and saying what you mean in the context of your environment. So what I'm going to show you now is some ways that we can go about that and ways that we can do it. And I've divided the how for the purposes of this evening into three categories. The first one are diminishing behaviors, which are really, really undermining. And they undermine your credibility. They have people second guessing you. And so the first one of these, and this is my all-time pet hate, and that is the permission. Asking permission. And particularly in meetings, you'll see, can I ask a question? So those 6 words are 6 unnecessary words because, let's just say it plainly, that question, using a question to ask for permission. And people are going to second guess you. So it's 6 unnecessary words. And what it is, it's a stalling technique. And what that signals to people, not necessarily on a conscious level, but on a subconscious level, is that you are uncomfortable with what you're about to say, or that there's some level of discomfort there about what's coming up and about what you're asking. It signals that there's a level of anxiety and perhaps some stress. Now, it's not necessarily as black and white as that, but it tends to show that you're very uncomfortable in that given environment. So when you ask a question, you want to make sure that it's intentional. You want to ask intentional questions. So dump the need for asking permission to ask a question because you just have. And it makes you come across as so much more confident in a situation. You can, if you find it challenging, you can say something like, if I may make a suggestion, and it's not really a question, and you just keep talking, you don't wait and pause for someone to respond. So that's the first one. The second one is another all-time favourite, and that is the word sorry. Generally speaking, this is more commonly used by females, but not necessarily. It is used by both men and women, where the beginning of your conversation starts with sorry. And I can think of a particular supplier who, wonderful, lovely, lovely lady. And she's so helpful and she's so good at what she does. And yet every time I speak to her on the phone, very often the first thing she will say is, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, Kerryn. I'm so sorry." And it's such a shame because she's so good at what she does. She's a lovely, lovely person. And it can create a bit of a negative anchor that this person will apologise all the time. And it's like they're apologising for their existence. And what underlies this pattern of behaviour is that it's a way of diminishing yourself, making yourself small so that others are less likely to judge you or less likely to judge you harshly. It's almost like the please don't, you know, judge me. Please don't be mean to me or nasty to me because I'm going to put myself down first and get in first so that no one else can. It's a bit of a victim mentality. So I just want to check in. Are we all making sense so far? Everyone's following on. I can see Ella nodding there. Excellent. If you do wish to, if you want to ask a question, please pop that in the chat box, and the very helpful moderators who will let me know. I'm very happy to answer questions at the time as well, if that helps. All right. So that's sorry. So you want to just dump the sorry and just totally leave it out. You can say something like, "I apologise," or as what you can see on the cartoon on your screen in front of you, let's say you're late for a meeting, you can say, "Thank you for your patience," rather than, "Oh, sorry, I'm late again." Like if you're late for a meeting, "Thanks for your patience, everyone," and go in and continue on. And I mean, these sorts of, the use of this word happens a lot. It's insidious, and we come from a culture of almost where sorry has become this reflexive default response. You know, you brush someone in the supermarket, although not at the moment with the COVID 1.5 meters, social distancing. We must say, "Oh, sorry, oh, sorry." So sorry is reserved for where there's genuine, heartfelt emotion. So save it for the genuine, heartfelt emotion situations and come up with one or two of your own alternatives that you can use instead of the word sorry, like, "Oh, or "I apologise," or if you're a bit of a humorous character, you can come up with some sort of humorous response, "Oh, that was a close call," or whatever it is that works with your personality. So that's my challenge to you, is to come up with one or two responses of your own that you can use. The next one we have is where people get defensive, and that is quite common, and in both personal and professional circles. And communication is really, I see it in three phases, and these are the three T's, where you'll have transactional communication, and then you have territorial, and then you'll have transformational. In those transactional types of interactions, it's very, it's like, "Would you like fries with that?" I was in the supermarket recently and I got to the checkout and I had my handful of things, and the person at the checkout, without even looking at me, said, "Hello, how are you today?" And it was like they were just pilot that was coming from a script. There was clearly no genuine care or concern. And I was thinking to myself, what if I don't respond? Will they actually look up and say something? So that's transactional, where there's no emotion, it's more of a politeness, social niceties, if you will. And the next one is territorial. We spend a lot of our time in territorial exchange, where we're wanting to convey our point of view or wanting to bring someone across to our way of thinking. So quite territorial. When we're territorial, emotions tend to run a bit higher because we may feel threatened in our position, or threatened with whatever's at stake at the heart of the conversation. And And that means when emotions are running higher, we're in a state of relative stress, and we go into a red brain state. I call it a red brain state, which is where we're going into that reptilian brain, the more primitive structures in the brain, that's why reptilian brain. And we're less able to see someone else's perspective, be open to new ideas, to be creative and innovative in that moment. Like if you want to run a creativity session, you've got to have everyone who's relatively relaxed and feeling quite comfortable, because creativity does not work when people are stressed. So when in territorial exchanges, we're in red brain, we're a little bit stressed, and we will typically exhibit a fight, flight, or flee response. So some people will fight, and perhaps you can reflect in your own lives which individuals are more likely to arc up and want to you and take you on. You probably, if you don't know them, you've probably seen them in your networks and potentially your workplaces and social circles. And you'll have people who, what do we have, fight, flight, or freeze. So people who freeze, it's literally that. They freeze, they don't say much, or they're not really capable of much of a response. And the flee, people just tend to just shut it down and exit as much as they can. So in that state, in that territorial exchange where experiencing more stress, we will typically exhibit one of those three patterns, depending on how confident we feel or how fixed and attached to the outcome of the conversation. So you can see on the cartoon in front of you, we've got someone demonstrating there, though she's not saying anything, she's actually giving a bit of a punch. So it's not going to win you any points in the workplace. And if you look at some of the really interesting studies done on when people lie, what happens, because the body never lies, that the body has clues. People who lie will try and they will try and convince you. It's like this person who's just going over the top. They will overtalk, they will talk more. And I learned an expression my mentor used to tell me, and it was the person who's doing most of the is the person who's buying. So in a sales situation, let's say you're buying a car, if the car salesperson is doing most of the talking, they're trying to convince. Whereas if they engage you and ask you what you like or what sort of things you're wanting in a car, what you're looking for, what features, and you're doing more of the talking, then you're more likely to be buying and convincing yourself. That's a comment on territorial conversation. The ideal is to get to transactional, where you can literally elevate yourself above the conversation and reconnect with what is it we're trying to achieve here and how you can best navigate that and acknowledge what it is that you're seeing and say, look, Jack, I appreciate this is a bit of a hot topic for both of us. Why don't we reconnect again tomorrow or next week and look at some ideas, and in the meantime we can explore some research or explore A, B, and C, D, or speak to someone else about it, because that time can sometimes diffuse the entire situation. Easy to say and more challenging to do in the moment, to have that level of cool-headedness where you can be objective and literally break it and then come back again, so you've both had time to cool off and think about it a little bit more rationally. All right, let's move on to the next one. And this is in the context of being defensive, when people are in that in the territorial conversation mode and they're feeling really fired up about it, what can happen that will do you a disservice is people can start to assert the person rather than the idea. So they start to attack the person and it becomes very personal. You said, you did, and then it goes back and forth. No, but I only said this because you, and back and forth. And that is really a lose-lose situation for anyone. So my strong recommendation is to keep your language focused on the idea and not the person, so it doesn't become personal. So I'll pause at this point. Ella, have we got is there any questions? If anyone wants to raise their hand.
Yeah, we've got a question from Tao. So
Yes.
I'll read it out to help you out as well. Tao said, most of the time it's a natural reaction to say, can I ask a question? Or sorry. What is your tip, Kerryn, on how we can break away from that habit?
You're absolutely right. It is a habit. And the reason it's a habit is because it's been repeated over a long period of time. One suggestion that works really well is to get a buddy, someone who will call you on whenever they hear you say that, and you can have almost a bit of a game, if you like, where there's got to be skin in the game. There's got to be skin in the game. So it's almost like, all right, I'm committing to, dumping that behaviour, and someone else is committing to something else. And when you catch each other, it's in the spirit of fun that you might donate, $1 to a central thing, and maybe go out together and go and see a movie or have a drink or whatever it might be. Go and see a show, and get a buddy to help you out and say, hey, I really want to improve my presence in meetings or my whatever it is. If ever you notice me do X, I want you to let me know. Kick me under the table, do some people have gestures, so they'll sit like across the table from one another and they have a specific gesture. And if they see their friend or their buddy do that gesture, then they know, oh, damn, I've done it again. Because the first step to any behaviour change is self-awareness. And when you've got a pattern of behaviour where it's so entrenched that it's automatic and you're not necessarily aware that you're doing it, usually it helps to have someone prompt you when they see you doing it or when they hear you saying what it is that you don't want to say. It's a great question. Thank you.
We've also got, Craig say, yes, always best to avoid ad hominem. And then Alex said, I tend to ask, can I ask a question as I'm conscious not to dominate conversations? I thought it's a polite way to check if it's a good time to ask questions. What do you think, Kerryn?
I think ask the question. And if it's not a good time or it's not appropriate, the person will say, look, can we just park questions and we'll address them at the end? You could you can still be polite about it and say, look, excuse me, what I'm wondering is, and then you ask a question. And they might say, oh, that's an excellent question, Alex. Is that okay if we just put that in the parking lot and we'll do questions together at the end? And as long as you're okay with that if it's not an appropriate time for whatever reason, that they'll, at least you flagged it and they'll address it when it's a more appropriate time.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, because some people tend to say, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm going to ask a question, but instead of that, rephrasing it, but still asking the question.
And that's the double whammy. Sorry, can I just ask a question? And you'll see me start twitching in the room going, no. Yeah. Good question. Any other questions there, Ella?
Not at the moment, but I guess I want to ask a question as well to you, Kerryn. I'm one of the younger people. I'm sure in the crowd there's a few other younger people as well, but young people tend to struggle with, entering the corporate world. And it's really hard because no one really teaches you to communicate properly over email or to execs. And I think that's a very big struggle, especially when I talk to grads at my company. They tend to ask me those kind of questions. So what is your key advice that you would kind of recommend, or anything like that you would recommend?
So when you're addressing someone in an email form, do you mean in a written form?
Like just in general, an advice to young people like myself entering the corporate world. What is something they could be practicing or just kind of make note of when talking to senior people? Because a lot of things that I did when I was in my first year in corporate would be the way I write emails would be, I apologized but, or I'm wondering, I just want to know, or I just want to find out this, would you be able to do this? Or yeah, all of that. Can relate. Someone just mentioned can relate.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thanks for that one, Ella. So when you're speaking to someone that has considerable hierarchy, you can do similar to one of the previous slides. Rather than apologising, you can thank them for something. Thank you for your views on whatever, or I noticed you. What I'm trying to say is make it personal. So make a comment that demonstrates that you have read the annual report, or you were at their presentation, or you were in a meeting that they were in and you were aware of their comments that they were making in the meeting. So it's personal and relevant, because they will receive a huge volume of emails, and in that noise of emails, when you're talking to them directly as a person, that cuts through, and people like that. It's like on LinkedIn, when you get all of these messages, but very few of them are actually tailored to you. Well, this is my, it's different. Very few of them are real messages from an individual. Most of them are template, copy and pasted. I don't know if you've had that experience, and it's, you know, hi, or it's something very generic. And yes, radars these days are pretty high. And so when we see things like that, we don't respond to them, because human beings are wired for connection, and we want to feel like people actually are interested in us as individuals. And there's a saying that no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that applies here. So if you can demonstrate that you've actually noticed what this executive or CEO is doing or has said, or perhaps they've just released a new strategic plan, whatever it might be, comment on something that demonstrates you're up with what's going on and you actually have something to say, which means that's going to take a little bit of time to do as well. In this day and age, we want to do things quite quickly. We have increasingly shortening attention spans, and as I heard it described recently, that I thought was really good. You know, we have the attention span of a goldfish now. It's a rather concerning thought, but so demonstrate that you're aware, you're a real person, and respond with relevance. Is that a question, Ella?
Yeah. That's good advice.
Awesome. Any other questions there before we move on?
We've got a few. So we've got one from Jeff. Should we be differential when communicating with senior people? I guess a part of your previous answer kind of answered it, but is there anything that you would kind of add to that for that question?
To be differential, so
should we be differential when communicating with senior people?
You always want to be respectful, and that can be interpreted very differently depending on what your upbringing is. Different families, different cultural backgrounds have different ways of demonstrating respect. I think the key thing, and it's a bit of a fine line at times to walk that tightrope of paying respect to the way that you're brought up and being respectful towards the person in a way that they recognise in their culture as showing respect. So definitely, I mean, you're using polite language. I've found that in terms of communication, I get better results and a better response when I treat them as a human being and not some got up on a pedestal or, you know, a rock star. I treat them as a person respectfully, but as an equal. I believe that every person has intrinsic value, and that even though they might be 20 or 30 years older, for example, you have some intrinsic value that they don't yet have. And so you are valuable within your own right. So it doesn't make them better, it makes them experienced in different ways.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that was a really good advice. I've got Johnny asking how to practice, how to be concise when giving answers, i.e. direct, and also to get others to be less verbal and direct. Did I get that question right, Johnny, or did you mean something else?
I think this is in reference to cultural preferences when it comes to communication. Certain cultures requires context before they jump into the question, but it's usually interpreted in the Western culture, especially in the Australian culture, as being very verbose and not getting to the point. So potentially, is that something that you can work on to improve the quality of your communication by being more direct?
It is, particularly in the workplace, and thanks for the question, Jeff. When you're in the workplace, what is helpful for everybody, context, and also understand where the question's from and what it is you're about to say, is to do your best to language it in the what's in it for them, for the other person that you're speaking with. And that might be so that I can get the most accurate data for this report, or so that I can plan my time more effectively. What I'm wondering is, so always state the end outcome up front, what it is you're wanting to achieve. And you can do that in your emails as well. You know, dear Jack, thanks for such and such. To help me plan my time more effectively, you know, would you prefer I do, or my thinking is I'm doing A, B, and C, and then you can, you know, check in whether they've got any different views on that. But it's that end game, what's in it for them. So if they want you to have a really accurate report or to prioritize something over something else, then you're putting that out there first, rather than talking about, for example, how busy you are, or how you're not sure about whether this is right or that's right. Just bring the language back to what it is that you're wanting to achieve. What's the outcome you're wanting to achieve? And that works really well in meetings too. Because what I've found is a lot of people in executive roles, I'm generalising here, but it's more likely that they've had more years in the industry doing what they're doing, and they tend to be quite outcome focused. They tend to prefer shorter emails with more bullet points because they get such a large volume of emails, they tend to scan. So you can make their lives easier if you just literally get to the punchline. It works well. With that, I mean, I've generalised there. With that said, take the way they communicate in an email as a bit of a clue as to what their preference is. So some people are quite verbose, others literally bullet points. And with that said, though, with the bullet points, a lot of people, well, not a lot, many will like that, and then there'll also be people who find that a bit offensive. It's like it's really direct and it's really rough and it's a bit abrupt. Understand that it's not personal. This is the other side, the other party communicating their own personal preferences if they want to get to the point. So you can take cues from how they write emails and how they structure their emails. But my overarching recommendation there is to state the end game first.
Thanks, Kerryn. We might pause on the Q&A there. Did you want to continue with your content?
Okay, let's do that. There we go. So the third category is about disregarding the person that you're communicating with. So the aim here is what you can see on your screen, to delete the disregard. And it's about being fully present. This comes back to some of the questions that were being asked, and responding with relevance. So too many times I've seen people and they've got their answer and they've got their response and they're hanging on to that and they're just waiting for a cue or a gap in the conversation to just deliver what it is that they're hanging on to. What it also shows is that in that instance, the person may not have been really listening. And when I say really listening, I mean you're hearing what's said, but you're also hearing what's not being said, because sometimes that's just as important as the words that are being said. So one of the ways then we can demonstrate disregard is by using the word but. And there are a number of words in this category. But is the most commonly used. Someone will say something and we'll say, oh yes, but, and then we come up with an excuse. So the brain doesn't process negatives very well, which means when you use the word but, you've just negated everything that came before the word but. So in the cartoon on the screen, the person is here saying, yes, sir, I tried building an ROI case for our BI project, but I couldn't access any reliable data. So the person listening to that message will really hear, I couldn't access any reliable data. They don't really hear or register the fact that the person has tried to build a case for the project, that there's been an attempt. The brain literally deletes that. So the brain will hear the but and hang on to whatever comes afterwards. So it's a common language pattern that's used, and it also overlays the territorial conversation. It's the yes, but, and it demonstrates that there's not been great listening happening and the person's defensive and they're justifying their position. So I recommend deleting that and replacing it with something like, and we've got the example here on the screen in front of us, something like, I've got limited data, I can put it together by X date, or would you prefer I go and access other data sources, or use your own words for whatever the context is. And is often a good replacement. You get asked a question, you say something, say and. What that means is I haven't been able to find any access or access any reliable data. So and can often be a bit of a swap for but, so that's something to keep in mind. Let's move on to the next one. I'll give you a moment to read that. This is a simple thing, and yet it's often done really poorly, and that is getting people's names right. So if you want to come across as confident and having authority, it does help enormously to get people's names right, and that's both speaking and in writing. And recently I was dealing with a client who I'd been working with. We had phone calls and Zoom calls and emails and exchanged many, and we'd met with the CEO, and then in an email to the CEO and myself, it had my name spelt as Kerry, so there was no N on the end. Now it is a simple mistake, and people do make mistakes, but it made them look bad, and it makes me look like I'm dealing with someone who I haven't had much to do with before. So it actually says a lot about paying attention to the particulars and the details. So names are things that are emotional for people that people will respond to, which is why if you use someone's name, you will get more cut through than if you don't use their name. So I could say, let's say Ella asked a question. I could say, oh, thanks for the question. If I say, thank you, Ella, thank you for that question. Ella, it's more personal, so Ella will feel more validated that she's been heard. Instance. So names are important, and do your best to get names right. That really makes a difference. So how are we looking so far there, Ella? Have we got? I see we've got some people joining us. That's crazy.
Yeah, people have been popping on every now and then, so that's really cool. I just want to mention a comment from Craig answering back to Jeffrey's comment earlier. Craig said, from my experience, culture plays a huge role in that. So referring back to what Jeff was talking about, I'm working in Japan, which is hierarchical, sorry, that was my phone, in the automotive industry, which is traditional and conservative. So deferring to more senior people is a must. And traditionally, seniority is based on age and time in the company. Very valid comment there.
Yes.
And Annie had a really good question, by the way. What advice do you have for those that naturally have a softer voice to be heard, as often their ideas tend to get dismissed compared to when their peers who say the exact same thing? I can relate to that as well. When I was a little bit more, last year I was like that.
Yes, a really good point. Thank you for that. And it is a challenging situation. And my comment is, well, look, you could go off and do vocal training if it was something that you felt really passionately about. That is one option, and learn how to project more. There's a few things you can do. Firstly, check your posture, because as obvious that sound, when let's say you have your hands in your lap, for example, and your shoulders are forward, it collapses your rib cage, and it makes it more difficult to project your voice. So better posture equals better projection of voice. You're right, you're absolutely right with the pitch of your voice. A deeper voice carries further and is heard more easily than a softer, higher pitched voice. And that's why, generally speaking, and like it might seem unfair, but it is what it is, a male voice is more likely to be heard. Now, with that said, though, a short story, my partner's sister used to volunteer in the CFA, and when it came to doing the radio, they had lots of men who were, clearly very capable, but her voice, because it was a higher register, actually carried further over the radio, and she then became the voice of the radio because she was easier to hear in that particular bandwidth or frequency that they were using. But back to meeting room situations. So posture first. Definitely want to sit upright and shoulders back. You also want to use a slight movement when you're just about to speak, because that will catch people's attention. So if you were sitting relatively still, and now we're getting into non-verbals, which is like there's a whole multi-day training on that one. Assuming you're sitting relatively still, just before or as you start speaking, you make a definite move forward, because people will their eyes will naturally go to movement. So make sure that, and do it intentionally. So if there's a really soft, almost apologetic, I was just wondering, it'll often be ignored. So good posture, speaking up, and then moving just as you start speaking, and often moving forwards will go a long way to being heard. And if there's a bit more movement, like you might put your hand forward or your arm forward or something like that to create more movement so you're more noticeable. Now that's a non-verbal response combined with speaking. You've got to be intentional about it as well. So I'm shifting into non-verbals now.
I really like that though. I think that's really good advice, because I obviously in my first year in corporate, I was very soft-spoken, and I always got told that be a bit louder, you're really quiet, especially when I'm over the phone or speaking to someone in front of face-to-face. So I really hear you there, Annie. But I'm with you on the posture. Practicing with non-verbals is really great. So thank you for that. I'm just being mindful of time. We've got a minute left, but we've got one more question. Do you, Kerryn, have any suggestions regarding remembering names?
There's a few techniques. The way I approach it is, when I look at someone, like I'm really looking at them as if they're a painting, and I'm attempting to take in the detail. From time to time, I will attempt to find something that begins with the same letter as their name. let's say I meet someone at a networking event, say David. I don't know if there's any Davids on the call, but it's not personal. And let's say they seemed a bit cheeky. I might remember devilish David or whatever word pops into my head, and I'll just pair it with something that's a descriptive word, or colourful character, or quirky Kerryn. I don't know, whatever it is, that the same sound, and back that with their first name. That's how I do it. I don't know if that's going to work for you, but that's how I approach it.
Thank you. Have you got a lot to go through, or do you want to wrap up with something? Because I'm noticing people are probably dropping off because it's 8.
Yes. Thanks, Ella. So we've covered a bit tonight, and what I suggest to you is don't remember everything we've covered. Choose 1 or 2 techniques, tactics to take for a bit of a test drive and see how they work for you. And once you've feeling comfortable with those, then pick up some others. So by shifting the way that you come across and the way that you language, it changes the way that people respond to you in the workplace. And then in turn, it reinforces your level of confidence to speak up, speak a bit louder, project your voice more, using better posture, and it becomes this feedback loop that validates that you are the confident person that, well, it's your confident side that people are seeing when you change the way you communicate. I thank you all for your attendance tonight and questions, and really appreciate you dialing in from all over the world. It's fantastic to see so many people tonight.
Well, thank you so much, Kerryn, for taking out the time to be with us tonight. I know it's late for everybody as well. Thank you for the expert advice with us, and thank you everyone for staying so long and until the end as well. Even though we had some technical difficulties, which is very common with Zoom meetings and all these days. Thank you for sticking with us till the end. But if anyone would like to know more about Kerryn, you can obviously go on her website as well, as kerryngamble.com. On the first page, you'll see a free PDF download, which I've read through. It's really, really good tips. There's 7 tips in there that you can have a look. And it's my Bible, by the way. I've read it many, many times before. It's very useful. So that's a free PDF that you can download. And also her book is available on her website as well. Unstoppable, that is. So have a look. You guys will love it, I'm sure. I will also pop through a little feedback form in the chat box for everyone to fill in. And if you could give us some feedback on what you thought of the session, that would be really good. There you go. So very nice to know that. Thank you, everyone. If you enjoyed this session as well, we have more webinars coming up. There's one more which I will paste the link in here for you, and that's coming up on Jan 28th. So this one is actually our last session for the year. So Happy New Year and Merry Christmas, everybody. And yeah, we really want to see you back here again in the new year 2021. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Kerryn.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your evening.